What's up, everybody? I'm bored. That's why I'm making this video. While I usually talk about how terrible High Guardian Spice is, they can get kind of boring sometimes, so I thought I'd spice it up by doing something different. And there is a burning question that basically nobody but me cares about. How strong are the High Guardian Spice characters compared to themselves? Who is the most powerful? Basically, I thought I'd do a ranking video, just ranking all the characters to see who's the strongest and who's the weakest. Sounds simple, right? No, it's not. First of all, I have to say I'm not going to be ranking every single character in the entire show. For one, there's too many, and for two, it's kind of hard to place a lot of them, even some of the major characters. I had to cut a lot of people from this list, even some that I originally wanted to add on there, but the reason I had to take them out was because it's really impossible to say just how strong they are or how they'd stack up to other characters. To put it in perspective, a majority of the teachers don't even fight, at all throughout the entire series, and we don't really know what they're capable of. A good example of a character who I really wanted to put on this list, but eventually decided to cut, is Dretch. She's a demon who has the powers to make portals wherever she wants and a few other abilities like telekinesis. You already know how OP I think portals are, but that's not all. She can also make portals into the demon realm, which is another dimension. And if anybody in this show got caught in that, there are very few of them that could come back. So with an ability that powerful, you'd think she'd be on this list, but no, I really couldn't add her. For one, we'd never see her fight once, so we have no idea what her strategies in combat are, and even if she does have this really overpowered ability that could let her win almost any fight, we don't actually know if she'd use it in character that way. And we don't really have much to look at how fast or how powerful she is, so we don't know what kind of attacks she could take or how quickly she could throw out her powers. So at the end of the day, it's really hard to compare her to anybody who actually has feats. We could make a bunch of assumptions for how powerful she is, but at the end of the day, they're just assumptions based on very little evidence. There are a lot of characters I wanted to add, but I ended up cutting a lot of fluff and we're left with about 25-ish people. I know it sucks that you don't get to figure out how powerful Snapdragon's brother is, but honestly, I think it's better if we get a lot of this side trash off the list. So how do we decide who stays and who goes? Well, I made a few rules for you to qualify for this list. Now, they're not all 100%, there are some exceptions, but basically this is what I'm going to be abiding by. 1, the character has to have a name. Big asterisk here because there are some unnamed characters that I think are notable enough to be added to this list. But this rule is mostly here to weed out random side orc number 43. There are a bunch of background students and random characters who don't even get a name, and I don't want to fill up this list with a bunch of randos who don't really matter. Next up, the character has either have to been in a single fight, or they must have done something very notable that can give us an idea of where their power is. So this weeds out a majority of the teachers because they don't really do much or have anything to give us an idea of how strong they might be. An important thing to note here is if a character is afraid of another character, that could sometimes give an indication that that character thinks they could be beaten by them. So if one character is utterly terrified of a more powerful character, you can generally assume that they think they could be beaten by them. There are exceptions to that obviously, but it's more of a case-by-case thing. And lastly, we're going to be basing this list off of who could beat the people below them more often than not, assuming they use their standard gear and standard combat strategies they use in the actual show. So a character in spot 4 would probably be able to beat everybody below them more times than not. So yeah, this is the basic rule set. There are going to be some exceptions, but I'll bring them up when they appear. With that out of the way, let's party. Starting out with the weakest of the weak, the bottom of the barrel, Aster. Okay, I'll be honest, he's just on this list so I can put him at bottom tier, but you guys probably saw that coming. Aster is a weak, pathetic, stupid joke of a character. Being a failure is baked into his personality. He fails in every single scene he's in. And if he were to get in a fight, he'd probably kill himself before the enemy could get the chance. I'm very confident he is the weakest student in this show, and pretty much everybody on this list above him could beat him without even trying. Hell, Buckles could probably take him, and Buckles didn't even qualify for the list.
Please stop! Aster sucks as a fighter. A child could beat him.
Speaking of children that could beat Aster, I can't believe I'm about to say this, Parnell. Now, before you skin me, I know Parnell seems like he'd be a lot higher than this, but in reality, he's not. Now, I want to say up front that Parnell is no slouch when it comes to combat. We saw in the Maze episode that he's incredibly athletic, very intelligent, and also can do fighting pretty decently. But what holds him back the most is his mindset. He is just a 10-year-old. His meager mentality would hold him back in 90% of fights, and he'd likely get scared and run away or fail to defeat the enemy. The only reason I put him above Aster is because Aster would probably trip and fall on his own sword before Parnell had to do anything. Now, if Parnell was bloodlusted and super aggressive, then he'd probably beat a lot of people above him on this list, but he doesn't act like that in character, so I can't really place him that high. We're finally getting to characters who can actually fight, starting with Cal. Cal is Parnell's cousin, and he constantly bullies Parnell all the time, and Parnell is afraid of him, so I think it's fair that he can be put above Parnell. And unlike Aster, he actually knows how to handle his weapon, as he was able to fight off the squid mech in the mermaid episode. But this is about as high as we can place him, as he doesn't really do much throughout the series, and he's only in 3 or so episodes, I think. He's borderline featless and doesn't do much of note, and he also gets his ass beat by Snapdragon, who happens to be the next character. Snapdragon doesn't do all too much in terms of fighting, but we do see Snapdragon just beat the shit out of Cal, and Cal remains afraid of him throughout the next episode, so I think it's fair to say that Snap is just stronger than him. Snapdragon can also perform various feats of athleticism. We see in the VR game they're able to jump super duper high, and all the movements they do in the game happen in real life, so they can actually just leap that high. They got hops, I guess. Next up, and this one's kind of surprising, Parsley. I know it's kind of weird, it feels wrong for her to be this low, but thinking about it, I am very certain that everybody above her on this list could beat her in a fight. It's also funny because the people directly below her would probably lose if Parsley just flicked them with her pinky finger. Now, Parsley is pretty physically strong. She does get that huge hammer and she's able to smash through boulders. But she doesn't have access to any magic, and she is just, a chick with a hammer at the end of the day. Not trying to say she's weak or anything, just the people above her would win more times than not in a straight-up fight. Now, narratively, I do think it's implied that Parsley is just more physically powerful than the other girls, but if you go off their actual feats in the series, she isn't really. And this is more of a list based on what the characters have shown in the show rather than just narrative implications. Time is next up on our list, and I think this is a fitting position for her. I do think she would win in a fight with Parsley more times than not. She has a ranged weapon in her bow, which has been shown to damage enemies who can take hits from Parsley, and we also know that she has access to magic, although it's very weak magic. And overall, she just has more combat skill than Parsley has shown. There are some lines of dialogue which could imply that Time thinks Parsley is stronger than her, but those are mostly comedic, and I don't know if they were actually serious or not. And when we do see them fight together, they're sort of relative with one another, but I think Time would just win. Next up, we have our first unnamed character who's an exception, the Demon. At least I think this demon's unnamed. I'm not going to rewatch the episode again to find out. If it did have a name, it was not a very memorable one. Now, I have to say, this demon is a very contentious point for me when it comes to this list. This is the first one that really had my head scratching. I do think it's fair to say that it's stronger than Time and Parsley individually, since they both had to team up to take it down. If it just caught them in a 1v1, I think the demon would win more often. However, the thing that makes this demon so tricky to place on this list is the fact that it has two very powerful hacks abilities. One is that it can regenerate. We see its arm get torn off and it just grows back almost instantly. And the other one is that it can phase through solid objects. The only way Time and Parsley were able to take this thing down is by using a magic spell that binded it so it couldn't phase or regenerate anymore. So, in theory, if you don't have magic and don't have a way to bind it so that it can't just phase through your attacks or regenerate, it could just keep doing that and eventually win. This presents a problem because there are people higher on this list who don't have magic, so if they were to fight this demon one-on-one, they'd probably lose because they just couldn't kill it. So unless you have a very specific counter, like time, then the demon would just kind of auto-win because they wouldn't have the ability to put it down for good. But characters that would lose to the demon because of this would likely win against characters like Time, who have the ability to beat the demon, although they'd likely lose more often than they win. So do I leave the demon down here or put him way higher up with some characters who probably wouldn't be able to kill it, although those characters, if they had the ability to kill it, would win easily? I've decided, for the sake of this list, I'm going to keep it down here. If the characters had the ability to kill it, they'd likely would if they're higher up on this list. Just keep in mind, if a character doesn't have magic, they're probably going to lose to this thing. Next up is Amaryllis. Okay, I'm very disappointed that I have to put her this low, and I wanted her to be higher because I'm very biased in favor of Amaryllis. But putting that aside, I think this is a fair placement for her. First of all, Amaryllis is a Terrasphere user, the first Terrasphere user on this list actually, and Terraspheres are busted. New magic is super overpowered. Being a fully fledged magic user gives Amaryllis a wide range of hacks abilities. She's better at new magic than Sage for the most part, and should have access to most of her spells, since new magic can do everything old magic can do, but better. This could potentially mean she'd have access to spells that can instantly knock people out, electrocute people, let her fly, summon other creatures into battle, and she could also create magical barriers to protect her from other attacks. In character, she most often opens with laser blasts, but I think those laser blasts would take out basically everybody below her on this list. And that pesky demon below her could probably be beaten since she has more magical knowledge than Time does, and she should have access to a binding spell as well. Next up, we have Nepicat, of all people. The reason I have Nepicat up so high is because we see him easily avoid all of Amaryllis' attacks, and he's also very physically powerful. Time takes multiple shots with Napping Potion over and over and over again, and eventually he loses, but only because he doesn't fight back. With everyone below him, I could see Neppy just leaping around them and smacking them in the face once to end the fight instantly. Maybe if Amaryllis pulled out some wacky spells to knock him out or turn him back to normal, he could lose, but I don't really see that happening if Amaryllis even has access to those spells. Now the demon could probably beat him, but Neppy does also have access to a Terrasphere, so yeah, he might be able to take the demon on too. Neppy is kind of more of a beast than I realized at first, I'm gonna be honest. Okay, pause real quick. Guess what character is next on the list? Go ahead, try and guess which character is next on the list. I guarantee you will not guess what character is next on the list. Actually, go down into the comments right now. Guess the character I'm going to say next. Because even I don't remember putting this character on the list, but I put this character on the list. Sea Dragon. Yeah, the Scythe, the dragon thing from underwater. I put him on here for some reason. I forgot his name. So this thing's a dragon, and he can be underwater, and all the girls are fucking terrified of him. So I guess that makes him stronger than Nepicat. He could probably beat Nepicat, if I'm being honest. We see him like smash straight through a castle, and he survives a prolonged Terrasphere blast, although that does kill him actually, so yeah, I'm confident this thing could chomp Neppy though, and probably everybody else below him. Except for the pesky fucking demon, again. Next up, we have Olive. Olive is up here for a few reasons. Firstly, she's a Terrasphere user, go figure, so that makes her pretty powerful. On top of that, Neppy is terrified of Olive and thinks he needs help from all the girls to take her down. And on top of that, she casually fodderizes Time with little to no effort, and thinks she could take Sage on too. Although Sage at the end of the series is more powerful than Olive in my opinion, I'll get to that later, this version of Sage would probably lose to her. Olive is great with magic and great with close quarters combat as well, so I think that makes her a pretty decent pick for this number. Okay, I already know I'm gonna get some hate for this one. Rhubarb. Rosemary is stronger than parsley, stronger than thyme, stronger than Nepicat, and yes, stronger than amaryllis. I did say that sentence out loud, and I firmly believe it. Before you ratio me into oblivion, please hear me out. Now, it may be surprising for a lot of people for Rosemary to be this high on the list. Rosemary is kind of a clumsy idiot, and she doesn't even have magic. And yet she's still this high. But however you feel about Rosemary, how stupid you think she is, how terrible of a character you think she is, I want you to push all that aside and look at what she's actually done on screen. Rosemary defeated Olive, one-on-one, fair and square, no outside help, no interference. She did it on her own, and she could probably do it again. Was this stupid? Yes. But did it still happen? Also yes. In the story itself, Olive wasn't holding back here, although it may seem so, because again, the writing kind of... But the story genuinely wants us to believe that Rosemary defeated Olive in a fair manner. Because of this, she should be above Olive, a character who could casually dodge around Thyme's arrows and easily defeated Thyme. So because of this, Rosemary should be able to do the exact same thing. And also, Nepicat was terrified of Olive, which means that Rosemary beat someone who Nepicat thought would defeat him. But being superior to Olive isn't the only thing Rosemary does. Oh, no. In the fight with the squid mech, we see Parsley hammer one of the tentacles and it doesn't even scratch it. Meanwhile, Rosemary's slicing through it like butter. Mostly because her sword, Flowering Thorn, is enchanted and nearly immutable, making it able to cut through almost anything if Rosemary puts enough force behind it. And it should be able to be used as a defensive tool as well, because Rosemary can just block things with it. And Mandrake was able to casually block one of Parsley's strikes, so Rosemary should be able to do something similar. Speaking of Mandrake, Rosemary was able to tank a point-blank Terrasphere explosion from this guy without a scratch. And Mandrake hits her with laser blasts in other parts of the episode, and she's completely fine afterwards. So based on the feats we see on screen, Rosemary should just be superior to Parsley, Thyme, and everyone else below her on this list. Except for, you guessed it, the Demon, who can probably just phase through all of her attacks, unless you think Flowering Thorn would negate that for some reason, but I don't see any evidence that it would. So yeah, actually looking at her feats, Rosemary should be this high. Next up, we have the She-Devil, Sage. Pisses me off that she's so much higher than Amaryllis, that bitch. Anyway, let's talk about Sage. Pretty much everything that I said about Rosemary would also apply to Sage as well. She has the same feats, almost, except Sage has a Terrasphere and magic, and she uses it sometimes when the plot lets her. Sage was also able to tank point-blank Terrasphere blasts from Mandrake, and she also made Olive literally gasp at her raw power when she pulled out that overpowered magic technique she learned at the end of the series. Her magic blast was the one that finally took Mandrake down for good, although Mandrake was heavily wounded at this point, so I don't think that makes her stronger than Mandrake. But I think it's fair to say if she whipped this laser out and it hit anyone below her, they would probably either be knocked out or vaporized. She also murdered that sea dragon, which all the other girls were afraid of, so I guess that's technically a feat in her favor? So yeah, that's pretty cool. Next up, we have a character who I was very iffy on including. That would be the potions teacher, Redbud, everyone's favorite. Now, Redbud doesn't get into any fights throughout the series, but she does do something notable in the fact that most of the girls are freaking terrified of her, and I would be too, honestly. She has a Terrasphere and presumably decades worth of experience using it, and should be superior to Sage in new magic since she knows way more about it, and she carries multiple Terraspheres on her. So yeah, this lady's a pro. I'm still very on the fence about including her on this list because she's borderline featless, and you could argue that it's just impossible to tell where she really would place. But I think she shows up just barely enough to get on the list and be higher than Sage somewhat. Maybe you could argue Sage would win using her Super Omega Kamehameha laser blast thing, but it's iffy. Next up, we have Caraway. Caraway is pretty easy to explain. He's basically just Sage, but older, with more experience, and the same techniques, and a Terrasphere too. He was on par with Lavender back in the day, and Lavender's pretty powerful. We'll get into Lavender in a bit. Mandrake also seems to consider Caraway as more of a threat than the other girls, but I don't think this means that Caraway is stronger than Mandrake for reasons I'll get into later. Okay, not later, like a few seconds, but whatever. So yeah, I think it's fair to put Caraway above Rosemary and Sage, and also Redbud, because he has the combination technique with the old and new magic. Okay, so from here on out, we're getting into the high tiers, the upper echelons, the peak of the verse, starting with our boy Mandrake. Mandrake is a beast. He showed up for a single episode, and he's one of the most powerful characters in the show. And a lot of the scaling actually revolves around this guy, believe it or not. Let's just say Mandrake's only there for a few minutes, but he does pop off like crazy. First of all, he's a magic user, and he does use Terra Spheres, always a good start. And on top of that, he can use old magic as well, and he's super proficient at it. And not only can he use both new and old magic, but he's also super skilled with weapons and blades and close quarters combat as well. But what I think is really impressive about Mandrake is that he just has better raw durability than everyone else. I hope someone gets that reference. Mandrake took a near point-blank combination old-new magic laser to the face, straight on, and just walked it off afterwards like nothing happened. He does run away from Caraway here, but I don't think this means that he's weaker than Caraway. I think the reason he ran away was because he just wanted to poison and knock them out later one by one because that would be easier. And we later see that he does successfully knock out Caraway, so I think that if he got into a one-on-one fight with Caraway, he'd probably come out on top. He also creates just this huge, massive force field around the entirety of High Guardian Academy with a flick of his wrist, casually. And keep in mind, he does this after he got hit with the combination laser blast, so it really meant nothing to him. And if you think about it, he might have been channeling his energy into this thing throughout the entirety of the battle, making him more suppressed than usual. But that isn't stated, so I'm just going to assume he was going at full power for this. Not only does he keep fighting after getting stabbed in the chest by Olive, he also takes an arrow to the leg and gets hit by Parsley. Parsley can smash through boulders. And after all this, he just keeps going, like it just didn't happen. And he was able to go toe-to-toe with basically all the girls at once, and it took Sage hitting him with a super plot Kamehameha laser to take him out. But even then, he didn't die. Mandrake would probably easily beat everybody below him in a one-on-one fight. It takes multiple people just to take him out. And even if they did defeat him, he'd probably just get back up later like a slasher villain or something. Next up on our list, we have Lavender, the Ultimate Guardian. Early on in her career, she could fight relative with Caraway, and Mandrake is utterly horrified of this woman to the point where he thinks she would just murder him if she got the chance. Outside of that, there's not much to say. She's just Rosemary, but way, way stronger. And she's got weird armor, too. It looks weird. I don't know. Here we have a weird placement, the Giant Statue Guys. Yeah, the Giant Statue Guys. They don't have names, but I think they're an exception that can be put on this list. They're made of diamonds, which are the hardest element, according to Parsley, so that means they're nearly indestructible, and we see as much as none of the girls can even so much as scratch them. They should easily scale above all of these girls, as none of them were able to even make a dent at all. Even if they got stronger later, I find it hard to believe they'd be able to break through this diamond, because the dragon struggled a little bit, although it did eventually break through. So yeah, I could see these things just stepping on everybody below them and winning the fight. Next up, in some of the top of the list, the Triad. The Triad are pretty powerful, but most of the stuff they do is off-screen and only talked about in reference. I'm going to be ranking them all together because I think they should be relative to one another and it's hard to put them above each other. One of them was able to cut open the fabric of reality and go into the demon realm just because. They defeated the demons, so they should easily be above that, and they have thousands of years worth of experience over the other girls, and they're magic users, so they should be more powerful than them, not to mention they're immortal. Even if you think they wouldn't be able to damage the diamond statues below them, they could easily just banish them to the demon realm, so it's a Dretch situation if Dretch was in any way scalable. And finally, after years of anticipation, we get to the strongest character in High Guardian Spice, the most powerful, Buckles! No, I'm just kidding, it's the dragon, obviously. It's another nameless character. He shows up in a single episode and only for a few minutes at the very end, and yet he has the most powerful on-screen feat in the entire show. That being the creation of 5 entire stars. Just created 5 stars. It has that much energy inside of it that it can create 5 stars. If this thing targeted its energy towards the Earth and blew up, the Earth would be gone. And not to mention, it can survive as literally just a skeleton, so even if you did manage to melt all of its skin off or cut it or something, it wouldn't do anything at all. This dragon is basically the strongest thing in the entire verse, and it would destroy everything below it by sneezing. But yeah, that's the list. Oh my god, this video is way longer than I thought it'd be. I told you this was complicated. However, if you think this list was incorrect or there was something wrong, let me know in the comments down below. I'm really excited to hear you guys' reasoning. Maybe Buckles really is the strongest character and he did deserve a spot on this list. Let me know if you think that's the case. That is all. This has been Dave. I'm leaving. Goodbye.
Please stop! Wimplo sucks as a fighter. A child could beat him.